So welcome to this look back at the work of CRI's video department over 2012. Today we have one of the star reporters, Seth Coleman. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Dominic.
So Seth, you've chosen 3 pieces of work you'd like to talk about, 3 of your highlights over the last 12 months. What's the first?
Well, the first was one from several months ago. This is one of the earlier ones that I did actually at CRI, which was the story about the Flying Pigeon bicycle company. So this was a story that I traveled for. I went to Tianjin, which is where they have the factory where they still make Flying Pigeon bicycles.
Wang Dajian has been working for the Flying Pigeon Bicycle Factory in Tianjin, China for more than 40 years.
Of course, it's very different now than back in the day when flying pigeons were produced for the masses and everybody had a flying pigeon. Now it's kind of, they do a lot of exporting and there's a lot of other companies in China.
So we should explain, Flying Pigeon is a Chinese bicycle company.
Flying Pigeon, yeah, Feige in Chinese. It's kind of famous in China because, back in the day before there were a lot of cars and, in the early communist days, actually, the company started around, maybe I think it was just after the communist revolution, I believe. And, they ended up producing bicycles for people to get around on at a time when there weren't very many ways to get around. So, the interviewee in the story, the main interviewee is the guy who's worked there for some 40 years or something. And he said, at that time having a bicycle was a bigger deal than having a car is now.
He's looking forward to retirement, he says, and plans to pursue some of his leisure activities, like fishing and gardening. He leaves behind a Flying Pigeon very different from the one he arrived at.
This was a great character. He had a great story to tell. How did you find him?
So this is kind of how it worked. We contacted the company, and they agreed to the interview. They agreed to let us come and film in the factory, but they didn't really organize an interviewee for us. We weren't sure what we would find when we got there. So we arrived and we saw the factory first, and then I was pushing the lady who was showing us around to answer some of my questions. I thought I would interview her, but she was like, no, she didn't want to talk about it. So she took us to the office, and there was this guy, and he even spoke English actually, but in the interview he's speaking Chinese because he's just a bit more comfortable, although his English was very good.
So you've been working in CRI video department for the best part of 2012. You made many, many videos. What was it about this one that made you choose it as one of the 3 highlights of this year?
I had some good feedback. I mean, it's hard for me to judge my own work very effectively, but I heard from several very different sources, friends and things. They like this one, so I thought I'd pick it.
Okay, and it's one of 3, and I think the second picture that you selected was a story about a fisherman, but not a fisherman who caught fish in a conventional way. Right.
So he's a cormorant fisherman, and a cormorant is a family of bird. So it's a bird that does the fishing for the guy. So they used to do this in Arhai Lake in Yunnan, where Dali is. Dali is on the edge of Arhai Lake, and they did it in other parts of China too, several different places back in the day. And now it's a tourist thing. So you go now and you can buy a ticket, and as part of the package tour or whatever, you go and see this kind of fishing. Of course, now they use nets for the actual, catching of as many fish as possible in as short of time as possible. Like everywhere else, they use a net or something. Here, it's a net in that lake. But they put on the show for tourists, and it brings in a lot of money. So there's still something like 6 of these guys left who do this. Basically what they do is they take a rubber bands, and they stick it around the bird's neck, and then they toss it out in the water, and the bird is able to dive down and catch rather large fish, big fish, small fish, but it can't swallow them because it has the rubber band around its neck, so they're trained, to bring them back to the boat.
So again, you found a really interesting character to tell this story, and throughout the video we hear his voice, he's speaking, then occasionally you cut back to his face, and he's in the boat. And I was wondering, is this, you did the whole interview in the boat?
Yeah, this wasn't really something that was very, I wanted to do a story about this subject, but this particular interviewee wasn't arranged beforehand. We just went to where they were doing the fishing, and this guy seemed nice, and so we started chatting, and then eventually I was like, can I get into his boat so we, to do the interview, because I didn't have a tripod or anything, so I needed to be quite close to get a steady shot. So yeah, I climbed, from our boat into his boat and kind of crouched down and did the interview. And
what was it like to be so close to the birds? They seem pretty big.
Yeah, they're kind of gross. Birds are kind of gross, but it was cool. And then later, actually, he kind of made a little show of, he must do this with tourists or something, but he had us put our arms out and had his birds go on our arms and then let us take pictures that way.
Were they heavy?
They were pretty heavy, yeah, but manageable.
And there's an amazing scene in the video where the guy's feeding the bird. Now, I thought that, of course, the birds will have to eat, so I thought he'd just let them dive and catch their own fish. But no, he's holding the bird's mouth open and stuffing it with fish. That also seemed pretty gruesome.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he does that always, or because I believe there were 2 birds that he did that with, and I think they were the birds they had a couple of birds outside of the cage that the rest of the birds were in, and they were the ones that were taking care of eggs, laying eggs or sitting on the eggs. I don't know if that's related to why he was feeding them that way, or if that's how he feeds all the birds. I'm really not sure. But yeah, it's kind of gross.
Okay, so moving on to the third video, which was I've forgotten.
It's about a guy named Wang Feng, who's actually the memory.
That's it.
Yeah, the memory champion. Well, let's see. He may not be anymore, because this was a story from some months ago. And every year they have a memory competition, the World Memory Championships. And he won for two years in a row. He got the highest score. So there's something like 8 different disciplines relating to memorizing strings of numbers or a deck of cards.
His record for numbers memorized in an hour is 2,660. But he says he has no special talent, except maybe for hard work and attention to detail. Anyone can learn the techniques which make these feats possible.
I just had a normal memory as a child.
In the video, this guy claims to have no special power, just hard work and study. Was that your feeling?
Well, I mean, he says that before he started doing this, he wasn't good at remembering things. He didn't have any special, skill for memory. And yeah, because I came across this guy because I was reading a book called Moonwalking with Einstein, which is about this whole thing of people developing their memories in this way, which is actually a really ancient technique. The Greeks did it.
Deck of cards, which is a classic
so it's this very specific method that you can use, any person can use to train yourself to be able to remember things. It's a very step-by-step kind of thing.
For Wang Feng, 37 is a chicken, because when spoken in Chinese, it sounds like chicken. And 24 is a clock, because there's 24 hours in a day.
The techniques revolve around what they call a memory palace. So what you do is you kind of collect these memory palaces in your mind. And a memory palace is somewhere familiar to you. So we could use, say the studio. And then there's locales or loci, they call them, around the room. So the first one might be where this plant is, and the second one is, this chair, and the third one is where you're sitting, and the fourth one's where I'm sitting. And then, so you kind of have that memorized first, and that's kind of like the base that you build the rest of it on. So then you can put whatever you want in those locations. So it exploits the human brain's natural ability to remember locations because of our, hunter-gatherer past or whatever. We're really good at remembering kind of like physical terrain or locations.
One other question I'm asking guests on this program is news story. What news story over the last 12 months do you think was particularly newsworthy, interesting?
I guess I feel like, there's a lot of things that you could choose, for this. But I kind of feel like the biggest and kind of ongoing thing, it's been kind of going on for the whole year, is what's happening in Syria, the conflict in Syria. So, although I'm afraid I can't, I'm not as well. I think I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure that a lot of other people are too. Now, I know that it's really important. I really think that it's very important, and it always seems like it's coming up again and again. But it's easy to become kind of desensitized to it, and every day on the front page of the New York Times or whatever not blocked website you can find, you see something about Syria. And then, of course, after the third or fourth week or third or fourth month, then you start to kind of like, oh yeah, there's the Syria story, of course, you don't really think about it anymore. But this is a big deal, for people in Syria, for a country that was at peace. I thought about going to Syria back in 2010 or something, or 2009 when I was in Turkey. I thought I might just go check out Syria, I've always been interested in Syria. And now it's like, a complete war zone over there. And it has been for... I don't even remember when it started, over a year or something.
Well, let's hope one day it's safe enough for you to go and make some videos there.
Hope so.
Seth Coleman, thanks so much.
Thanks, Dominic.